Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Monica Miller, and this is Elena Romero. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we put together the images that you'll see today, and then talk about how we wanted to have a discussion and invite you into our discussion. So Elena and I met each other a couple of years ago, actually at an event here, right? And when we were asked to do this, we said, well, we would like to talk to each other rather than giving talks. The time was limited. Right. And we had an original idea of each choosing 2 images and talking about them, but that didn't work. So Elena actually took a deep dive and came up with this, the original group of slides that we're talking about here today, and then we talked about them together and presented them to you. So we could have made this much, much longer, but we tried to keep it a little bit under control. Yeah. So let me see if this works. Oh yeah, Elena. Oh, the first question I had for you, that's right. The first question that we asked each other which is an excellent way to introduce this conversation, as I said to Elena, how or do you wear pink?
Now, I will tell you that while I'm on stage wearing pink, it is not one of my favorite colors. In fact, it's one of my least. Throughout the slides that you've seen this afternoon, we've seen various depictions of pink and its associations to women and femininity. However, in this particular discussion, we're going to kind of look at it from the Afro-diasporic perspective, Latina and African American, and we have to really address the issues of race, class, and gender with the color pink. For me, being part of the hip-hop generation, I was very anti-pink for a number of reasons. I think initially I saw the color really being associated with a perception of beauty that did not represent me. And when I thought of pink, I thought of the color associated to one of my early childhood toys, the Barbie, which again did not represent me. And in fact, her sidekick, Teresa, who's very racially ambivalent, which was introduced to us in 1988, could have been Latina or could have been Italian, since there's always a play on words with Casa de Teresa when we talk about the association to Barbie and Barbie's world. So initially, that was kind of the initial kind of abrupt feeling behind the color pink. Also being a female in the hip-hop generation, the idea of pink and association to the pureness of femininity also gave out the perception of fragility. And working in a male-dominated space during the 80s, many of us had to conform, and to be one of the fellas meant we had to dress like them. And then associating ourselves with that color would be an automatic indication that we would be too girly and that we couldn't actually dance or play the same tune.
I had the exact same reaction, but for slightly different reasons. I still don't wear pink. I mean, Elena says I bought a suit. And I said, well,
bought
that's
it
great.
for this occasion, by the way.
And I said, I still don't wear pink. I don't own a single item of pink. It has never really ever been in my wardrobe. And it was for similar reasons. I mean, pink felt like, to me, growing up, a color that was associated with white standards of beauty that I could never meet. And I felt that, for me, I mean, it was only until, honestly, the hip-hop era, which we're going to talk about today, and when the color kind of came back into at least the popular culture that I was enjoying and being exposed to. But it was not a color that actually even exists, I would say, for women in my family. Some of the men in my family wear pink and have worn pink over the years, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But for me, it's not a color that seemed available to me, although I'm happy to say that my children feel entirely differently.
Right.
Yeah.
My father wore pink in the 70s, and in fact, having various influences. And I remember I would always ask him why, and he really didn't see an association to gender, which I thought was interesting, and still wears pink to this day. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the origins and pink in youth culture. And in my earlier statements, I addressed the concepts of race and gender, but I didn't really discuss or address class, which I will in a second. For the hip hop generation or Generation X, we really got our cues from a number of places. In the late 70s and 80s, we're looking at the West Coast with the surf influences, the punk subculture, and of course, the preppy or collegiate elite. And this is where now we start addressing that issue of pink associated with class. Brooks Brothers popularized the pink button-down shirt for men, and pink became the ultimate preppy color. In fact, Lisa Bernatch's 1980 book, The Official Preppy Handbook, paints a detailed picture of the lifestyle of the elite, as did Robin Leach's Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, which broadcasted this extravagant lifestyle of entertainers and athletes and business moguls, and of course, TV shows like Miami Vice that would promote pink as sexy and cool for guys to wear. So those are some of the early influences for the children of the hip-hop generation, and we kind of picked our cues really from there. The pink shirt, again, the polo shirt probably being one of the most classic and iconic silhouettes that we could think of, and eventually, as we've seen in more modern times, we've played off the traditional light color and now have played into various hues, kind of going more into a hot pink or a fuchsia color.
Mm-hmm. So when we were thinking about this slide, I was thinking about, okay, so if youth culture and hip-hop culture is taking this kind of influence from mainstream culture, what has been the history of pink, right, in the African American, especially in Black music and entertainment? Did it turn? Yes. Mm-hmm. So we've already seen that iconic image of Sugar Ray Robinson and his pink, I don't know what make of car, what was it? Cadillac, thank you. It's a pink Cadillac. So there's a way in which pink has had this kind of other history and other connotation within African American culture that is related to some of the things that happened in the 80s, but does actually go further back. I think in Black communities, and Elena and I talked about this, in both the US and the diaspora, like the question of pink is one that absolutely cycles around what's deemed appropriate for Black people in terms of race, gender, class, and sexuality, and the way that all of those four things cycle in some ways around each other. And we heard a little bit about this earlier today, but given that kind of majority societies often consider Black people to be excessive and extra, and I was really interested in that, in the image that we were focusing on in the last slide about the American woman who was in this kind of like pink and magenta. One of the things I was thinking about in terms of the history of that within African American communities is that during slavery, slaves were not allowed color. It was, African Americans were only allowed color on very specific moments, were allowed fancy clothing and clothing that would have saturated color on very, very specific moments. So one of the things that came up in my research many years ago was the idea that when people were trying to either buy their freedom or were trying to signal the fact that they were free, they would often buy something in a colorful fabric, right? Or they would trade for something in a colorful fabric. Frederick Douglass has this amazing moment in one of his books where he talks about just saving up enough money for a blue suit, right? So color has this very, very specific and changing kind of historical place in African American and people of color histories.
And in Latino culture, I can say, thinking of the quinceañera, pink being more of a very typical color, o color típico, which again, back to if you want to stand out, as us in hip hop would say, then we want to reinvent kind of the classics. So that's, almost too common and something that we would stay away from.
So, I mean, when the entertainment industry, this is what I've said about, so when Black people start entering into colorful clothing, right, there's such a desire for it and a desire for the colorful clothing to signal individuality. It often trickles over right into excess. And I think the 1920s and the Harlem Renaissance and that particular moment of consumption and of African Americans and people of color actually entering into consumption culture, right, is where this kind of desire for loudness, right? And also an expectation of loudness in some ways comes about. In the entertainment industry, it's pretty much de rigueur, right? Excess, extra, right? And it really does go back to moments that you see here with Little Richard, right? In the 50s and 60s with Sylvester, in the 70s around kind of glam and funk, right? All the way up to Prince, right? So there's a way in which there's that kind of expectation to a certain degree. What is also true that is that these, if I think about these three men in particular, right? They own that. They own the extra, right? And they also flip the script on it, right? Which is going to be a common theme of what we talk about today. Own the extra and flip the script on it so that what expectations that we all have talked about today about pink and its relationship to femininity, pink and its relationship to innocence or purity or being associated with childhood, right? Become I would say, differently seen, right? And put into a very different kind of lens. We've also seen a little bit of this earlier today. It's similar to what goes on when we think about pink in the African diaspora, right? I mean, I thought Tanya's talk about Mexican pink, right, brought some of this to the fore in terms of the ways that we think about how people in tropical, exotic places, right, dress and in some ways present themselves. I mean, I think in the Caribbean, right, pink as a color for dress, decoration, and architecture has, at least, I mean, even from the colonial era, I would say, has always been a part of the way that the built environment is there, but also related to the nature that it's the natural environment that it's surrounded by. In a similar way, right, in Africa, and we see the picture of the sapor again here, I mean, in Africa, vibrant color and color saturation, right, is something that has been fashionable for a very long time, and partly in reaction, right, to colonial strictures against, right, colonial subjects, right, being individualized as well as noticed and seen, right, during colonial regimes. So hip-hop, right, now we're going to switch a little bit. Hip-hop has, and that's why John Legend is there for some reason. Hip-hop has a very particular and spectacular relationship to the color pink, right, that kind of incorporates just this little sketch of history that we've been able to bring out here, right, in which Black people and those people involved in the music industry, right, appropriate, revise, remix, and mash up expectations around race and gender, sexuality, and even nation, which is why we wanted to include this diasporic portrait, right? And in many instances have used pink to do that, right? So I mean, they've used other colors too, but we're talking about pink today. Oh, went too far.
Too fast.
There you go.
So I mentioned earlier that as young girls in hip hop, we tried to stay away from the color pink for a number of reasons. We saw in the 1990s, we went from one extreme to the next, and that has to be dedicated to none other than the notorious Lil' Kim, who in fact not only embraced her pink, but also brought out the female rapper and her sexuality completely to the forefront. As women broke barriers in hip hop, became mainstream, and 90s really gave, way to a new confident female MC who utilized their sexuality and fully embraced the color wholeheartedly as they played off, again, their sexuality as a way to dominate and capture the market space. Lil' Kim, the queen of rap, became Pink's really #1 promoter that opened up doors for the next acts to follow, including Foxy Brown. And when she wore pink, it wasn't so much that she was wearing it in an oh-so-feminine, typical way, but rather she was really wearing pink hardcore, and this was really visually a turning point. And others, as I mentioned, would follow suit, which would lead us on to the next slide. To Nicki Minaj, who has called herself the Pink Barbie and who's named her album The Pink Print and Pink Friday, and you see pink over and over again. The Starship star, who gave herself, again, that name Pink Barbie, claims a fairy tale lifestyle instilled a deep-rooted love for the audacious color. Minaj, who often sports pink in her outfits and her hair, told Cosmopolitan a couple of years ago, and I quote, "When I was younger, we didn't have much financially, and I'd see little girls' rooms on TV, and they all be in pink. I shared a room with my brother, so I dreamed one day that I could have my own room, all pink, like Cinderella's. Pink takes me back to that time, and I feel euphoric when I wear it."
One of the things I also wanted to mention about this, about Minaj's use of pink, right? Two things. One, that when I see her in that latex jumpsuit, right, I'm thinking, you mentioned the word pink hardcore for Foxy Brown, and the way also when she's kind of revamping some of the things that we've said about boudoir, right, as well. This latex suit also seems to me a sort of really interesting or something analogous to armor, right? There's a way in which for her as a kind of female, and as a female MC, one of the first, a kind of really broad, very, very broadly popular rappers, that she's wearing this kind of pink jumpsuit, right, as a kind of, both a kind of second skin, right, but it's a hard skin, right? So there's a really interesting interplay here between softness and hardness, right, and the way in which a woman in hip hop has to do that. The other thing that it reminds me of in terms of that we want to bring to the fore right now is also fantasy, right? Hip hop has always been a genre that's been incredible, especially early hip hop, really, really invested in fantasy as it comes out of funk and other things, in terms of thinking about the way that some of, in particular, male rappers and hip hop icons started to use pink, right, as a way to, hopefully it's coming, yeah, as a way to talk about and to think about kind of otherworldliness, right? What Elaine and I spoke about feeling kind of as if pink were not the color for us, really had to do with a kind of sense of with a sense of belonging. One of the things that's so interesting to me about the way that male rappers, like Outkast in particular, has used pink, right, is that they are interested, right, they are interested in actually accessing, right, and talking about the possibility of other worlds, right, and the possibility of themselves occupying other kinds of identities in these worlds. And they signal it actually really interestingly through the use of pink, and also the ways in which they reference other people like Bootsy Collins and Sun Ra, who were also really, really influential in terms of thinking about otherworldly fashion for black but for black entertainers.
Now, when most people think of hip hop and pink, and men in particular, and I will address Cameron in a second, the reason why we started off with Outkast, and I'm playing off one of Outkast's title songs, Pink and Blue, is that in fact we had seen young African American musicians, rappers, wear pink prior to Cameron. And really it was the Atlanta-based duo that brought this kind of southern flair to fans around 2001, and really have kept it constant throughout their career. Both Andre 3000 and Big Boy wore pink in different ways, and have worn pink in different ways to really complement their individual style. Big Boy has much more of a street pink flair, while Andre 3000 has multiple influences from the late Jimi Hendrix, the psychedelic period, the preppy era, and of course Dandyism. He became the loudest pink dresser of the group. The colors are actually not only infused within their wardrobe as musicians, but also infused in their own clothing line called Outkast Clothing Company, which you see Big Boy wearing on the red carpet, one of the t-shirt designs.
And it's also true that, I mean, I think for Outkast, what's important here is the idea of shape-shifting, right? Is the idea of moving, right, between identities, of not being caught either in the identity as a rapper, as a hip-hop artist, as a kind of very specific thing that you can point to. I think they use this color, actually, the color and the kinds of fashion genres it's associated with, right, to actually move between and through, right, rather than in some ways not making themselves available to be labeled, right?
So, as I mentioned, Outkast had actually introduced pink to fans, but of course, we must say that it was really, truly Harlem rapper Cameron, part of the Diplomats, who really has become synonymous with hip-hop's thrust into pink. Cameron cemented his pink legacy by donning the most famous controversial piece, a pink mink fur, at the 7th on 6 fashion show back in 2002. Quoted in 2016 in GQ magazine in reference to why he would wear pink, he says, "When I first started wearing pink, it wasn't nothing I planned on doing or strategized. But people showed me so much love for pink and my pink mink that I had to go to Pantone and create my own color, which is called Killer Pink." A Killer Pink mink is interesting as we relate to Nicki Minaj and her hardcore Barbie image, because really pink does the work of representing both softness and hardness as realness for hip-hop artists and aficionados in male and both female and male. He goes on in the article to address also an interesting correlation of the color pink as well as class. And the journalist asks, "Is pink for everyone?" And he says the following, which I found interesting. He says, "Nah, a lot of people try, but they don't have really the right thing and what to do. I appreciate the effort, though. I also hate when people wear dirty pink. You can get away with black sweatpants for a day or two, but pink is something that you wear for one day, the day before you go to the washer or cleaners. And when people wear pink t-shirts for 3 days straight, it disturbs me. It just aggravates me." So there's this association of the color and its purity and its cleanness, and that also addresses to class, because the color was again synonymous with this kind of elite lifestyle that we've seen with fashion brands, let's say like Ralph Lauren and Tommy Hilfiger, that really talk about the preppy lifestyle. And so being crisp and clean and sharp, these are all stigmas that we have had to address as being poor people in urban centers.
Do I dare hit it again?
It'll freeze.
One more time.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. So what's interesting about what Cameron says there at the second time about coming with a kind of coming with a cleanness and a kind of pink, right? And what you said about Ralph Lauren and Tommy Hilfiger, right? CEOs, black CEOs, black hip hop moguls, right? Who have reached a certain status level within American culture, or in the case of Sean John, right? Actually become fashion designers, well-regarded fashion designers themselves. This pink polo, right, has really taken on a kind of what we were talking about as the kind of hip-hop Hamptons lifestyle, right? And it's a way in which, again, African Americans and Afro-Latino people have reappropriated, right, the symbol of corporate America on vacation, right? And actually taken it and said, well, no, this is African American mogul at work, right? So there's a way in which they become the polo or I'm assuming that's cashmere, right? So polo or cashmere takes on a very different connotation when it's on a kind of hip hop mogul.
And I can tell you my earliest recollections of meeting Russell Simmons was forever seeing him in a pink Argyle sweater. Yeah. He was always promoting kind of that hip-hop Hamptons lifestyle, really a remix on the preppy. And you have to take note that all of these hip-hop moguls are very, very well aware of the connotation of the color pink as it relates to race, class, and gender. Other moguls saw the power in pink as well. We saw street-savvy Jay-Z to P. Diddy. Notice that Kanye as well as P. Diddy are wearing kind of the Ralph Lauren polo shirt. Again, taking a classic and kind of remixing it and moving towards a much brighter, bolder color, right? It takes a certain confidence to be able to take on the color that had always been synonymous with something else and recreating it and making it, what's old, something new again.
And this trend of kind of reappropriation or kind of, mix-up goes beyond the moguls. Oh, please don't go forward.
Yeah.
Okay. Goes beyond the moguls and also goes beyond polos, right? I mean, as some of the early hip hop kind of legends that we saw in the previous slide became CEOs, right? A younger crop of people younger crop of entertainers, people who are actively producing music have come up, and they've also absolutely been using pink, right, and appropriating particular kinds of styles, but also just appropriating the gender markers around that, right? So here we have Pharrell, who is known, right, for a lot of outrageous fashion, right? In this case, the outrage here is that he's wearing not only a pink coat, but a pink women's coat,
Yes.
right? It's Celine, right?
Celine,
Yeah, Celine.
a cashmere woman's
Right.
coat, yeah.
And therefore, I mean, so not only has pink become a color that is allowed certain rappers and hip hop artists to riff off of particular identity markers, right? But here he's also playing a game, I think, with the fashion industry.
Someone had mentioned the connection of red and pink, and so here's a great example of how he's donning both colors, right?
Yeah.
So Pharrell Williams now shifts the influence from primarily, so we went from the influence being kind of West Coast, youth fashion kind of always kind of goes from East to West Coast in terms of influences, with Pharrell being popular in during his Neptune timeframe. He now shifts that influence back to the West Coast, and we have much more of that skate, punk, rock star influence. You have Tyler, the Creator, to Nas really proving the admiration for pink could move well beyond the polos. Pharrell, again, known for his signature streetwear style, really gets credit for really blending the East Coast skater rock lifestyle into hip hop, while at the same time not conforming to those traditional gender roles. Tyler, the Creator, has proved that the hot pink color isn't only suited for the polo, wearing a Supreme hoodie, for example. And we've also seen Nas, who has been quite a pioneer in hip-hop and Street Dreams, and his remix music video wearing a pink polyester suit, which at that time might have been considered a miss, but these days a hit would have been his 40th birthday. The Queen's MC actually turns head with his pink tuxedo jacket.
And I think what's interesting to me in these looks, right, of a sort of like younger, kind of younger generation, is that we have a certain way in which there's an invitation, right, in some ways to think about the way that pink signals vulnerability, but it's answered with the artist's own sense of versatility, right? So there's really interesting kind of pivot between those two ideas.
So we've done quite a bit of talk really relating to more so the conversation specifically to apparel, but in fact, pink is no longer limited to apparel and hip hop. From hair to footwear, cars to jewelry, pink has really become a staple. Drake, by the way, that picture, you can't see it because it's so very small, is donning a pink diamond encrusted jewel in his tooth. And several celebrities drive custom pink rides, reminiscent of Aretha's pink Cadillac. In fact, the photo in the center, the Audi, is an image from Instagram that Cameron literally just posted about 2 days ago in homage to breast cancer awareness. Cardi B recently, you might have seen her when she was donning a bathrobe and her Balenciaga tote, was wearing that lovely Louis Vuitton mink slide. And I could guarantee that's going to be a hot item this Christmas season. And we've noticed a number of other items. So really, there's no limit to where pink goes when it comes to hip hop.
But I think and one of the other things that's important to remember is, just as pink is being bought and sold within hip hop, right? I mean, it's become a part of not only the fashion culture, but also other kinds of commodities. I do think it still represents a kind of underappreciated and unnoticed aspect of hip hop artistry, which is its kind of contemplative, soul-searching aspects, right? And the way in which hip hop has always been a form from its beginnings of a kind of expression of organic intellectualism within the black community. Here we have Solange, right, who stepped out of Beyonce's shadow, perhaps, in 2016's A Seat at the Table, and in particular with the song Cranes, and her pink jacket is, the image of her in the pink jacket is from the video for that particular song. I like to read that jacket and this song, or the way in which Cranes, not just Cranes, but A Seat at the Table has been imaged visually with a lot of pink, right? These are all images from that Seat at the Table visual kind of rollout. As a kind of response to the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And a kind of sense of new Black youth activism. I see pink when Solange wears it, right, as a response that is in some ways nonviolent, very contemplative, calls on Black history, centers Black lives, and I think highlights the kind of a vulnerability to state violence and histories of trauma and abuse. Yet at the same time, the volume of that jacket in particular, I mean, again, forms a kind of, puffy armor, right? A certain kind of protection, right? The wardrobe is protective, right? It's soft, it's emotive, right? Of sensitivity, of care, and I think watchfulness. Like when we see her in the pink dress and where she is literally kind of a bird kind of watching over, in some ways, the landscape, right? So pink still has, I mean, as much as it can be related to a diamond in Drake's tooth, or a car, Cameron's car for breast cancer awareness, or symbolizing a certain kind of mogul status for something. It also, right, still has this really interesting kind of soft strongness or strength, right, that it represents for musicians
and I would add with that, just looking at that jacket, there's a sense of comfort and peace, and it gives me this almost sense of a blanket really kind of wrapped around her, and something familiar as well.
Absolutely.
And coming up on our last slide, we cannot have a discussion about pink without addressing the new millennial rappers and how they are continually not only embracing it but also changing the rules as we speak. Millennial rappers from Lil Pump to Lil Uzi and Tekashi 6ix9ine have proven that there's really no longer a stigma attached to the color. Many brands have also fully embraced the color, from Ed Hardy and Supreme and Bathing Ape and Billionaires Boys Club and Ice Cream, to even Adidas, proving that youth culture is pink, ready and embracing designs that really have made through that pink lens. Camouflage, for example, something that's been pretty much a staple within hip hop, has been embraced within the color hues. This is an image off of the Fifi video with Nicki Minaj and Tekashi 6ix9ine. You notice how hair kind of, again, throw back to that punk era. And in Tekashi 6ix9ine's case, it reminds me a lot of that little, like, My Little Pony, Rainbow Bright, kind of throw back to the 80s. So, again, remixing something more of a classic yet again.
And also, I mean, the purse, right?
Right.
I mean, there's a way in which, kind of what we've been talking here about, the kind of saturation of color, the histories of kind of a denial of color and embrace of it, right? A mix and remix, right? A kind of mashup, right? Of how majority culture has used the color to say a whole host of things, right? I mean, in the hands, right, of people of color, right? There's been a way in which the color itself and all of the things that it represents, right, have been manipulated. And somebody earlier today said that pink is a strategy, right? And I've been thinking about that all day, and thinking about this, thinking about these images, and how we might think of pink as a strategy for people of color.
And I think that we must also mention that while there are continual moves to extreme ways of dressing, by no means do we think that that's necessarily going to be a look or a strategy for everyone. No. I think, there's a certain level of confidence and ability, and not everyone is meant to wear a particular color. And in this case, pink has no limits, but in some cases, I think some of the old school hip hop folks look at it as a statement piece. You've got only a select number of people who would really don it head to toe. And I think some of that may come from that, you know, gangster pimp, exaggerated flair.
Right.
But nonetheless, I think, you know, kind of the moral to the story is that we really do assign meaning to color and to dress. And I think as cultural shifts, we'll find more acceptance in that color. We'll become more comfortable in the skin that we're in, and we realize that pink is really a powerful statement. Thank you.
Thank you.